Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the short delay. We're having a little technical difficulties. Today's webinar, Negotiation as a Process, Pathway to Achieving Positive Results. My name is Karen Tucker-Labello. I'm Director of Education for the New York Chapter ACP. Our facilitator today is Dr. Ankita Sagar. Dr. Sagar is a primary care physician and Director of Ambulatory Quality for the Medical Service Line at Northwell Health. She is also an assistant professor at Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra, Northwell. She co-leads the ambulatory quality curriculum for house staff at Northwell, and she is currently the chair for the NYACP's Early Career Task Force and loves dabbling in health policy and advocacy. Outside of work, Ankita loves spending time exploring her Brooklyn neighborhood with her husband and her dog, Ledoux. Our panelists today are Dr. Nicole Adler. Dr. Adler is a hospitalist and serves as a clinical lead for value-based management at the Manhattan campus at NYU Langone Hospital and NYU Winthrop. Her interests lie in high-value care and improving the quality of care delivery for patients at the end of life. In addition to the above, and most importantly, Dr. Adler is a wife and mom to 3 amazing kids. Dr. Lynn Cleary is a clinician, educator, professor of medicine, and vice president for academic affairs at Upstate Medical University. She is past governor for the Upstate Western region of the New York Chapter ACP and is active in both the chapter and national ACP. And last but not least is Dr. Chris El-Sayed. Dr. El-Sayed is a clinical professor of medicine and co-clerkship director at Nassau University Medical Center in East Meadow, New York. In addition to serving as the previous chair of early career physicians, he is currently on the New York ACP Council Board as counselor for the Long Island Nassau East District. Dr. El-Sayed has participated on many contract and negotiation panels for the chapter, and he uses his MBA to help educate physicians and students with financial matters. Before we begin, I'd like to review a couple guidelines. All participants will be on mute. If you have a question, please type it in the dialog box at the right, and the panelists will answer your questions at the end as they come in. Following the webinar, you'll receive an email with handouts of the slide presentation, and we will have the recorded version of the webinar on our website at www.nyacp.org. I now would like to welcome Dr. Ankita Sagar and our panelists.
Thank you so much, Karen. So just wanted to highlight a little bit of background about why we are discussing negotiations as a process. First of all, on an average day, if you think back, how many times do you negotiate? So we're negotiating with our patients, our colleagues, our staff members. We're negotiating with significant others at home, kids, pets, babysitter, dog walker, other commuters and drivers, and of course yourself at times. Now the question becomes, that's a lot of negotiating, and chances are we all have some level of skills that we've developed over the course of time. But what about those areas where it is a high value scenario? And maybe not all the stakeholders in each of these types of negotiations are the same or come in with the same priorities. But most of all, not all negotiations are created the same. So we're hoping to really get some quick tips from our experienced faculty here about what makes a good negotiation a successful process. So let's start with question number 1. So this question is for Dr. Adler and Dr. Cleary. Can you describe a negotiation in which someone was particularly effective? What did that person do that contributed to the process and the success? So Dr. Adler?
Sure, thanks. So I think a time when somebody is particularly effective in a negotiation is that they're prepared. I think coming into a negotiation when you've really thought about, what you're asking for in the negotiation, what you want to get out of the negotiation, what it is that that person is hopes to have the outcome be is really critical. I think also coming into the negotiation, not only knowing what you want out of the negotiation, but also understanding where the other person is coming from. So it's not only that you want to know what it is that you want out of the negotiation, but understanding where the person that you're negotiating with, what's important to them, where that they might be able to be flexible, where are the places that they're not willing to really move at all. And so between those two places, when the negotiator really says, here's what I want, and I'm really prepared to ask for these things, and I understand that here are places where you're not able to be flexible, here are places where I know you might need help, and I can bring that to the table. I think those are two areas where you can really be successful. And then the sort of last thing that I wanted to highlight is that it's really important going into a negotiation, and a way to be successful is to be upfront and ask for what you need. So I think sometimes people don't realize that the person you're negotiating with doesn't always know what you want to get out of the negotiation. And so being transparent about what it is that you're asking for. A lot of times the person you're negotiating with does not know upfront what it is that you want. And so just asking for it can really lead to a successful negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Cleary, can you give us some of your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm going to use some examples to illustrate, I think, what Dr. Adler just talked about. And most of these are negotiations about salary, and one is a negotiation about reporting structure. So with regard to salary, here's an example of an ineffective approach to salary. Someone who one of many applicants for a position who had good experience, was a very viable candidate, and when it came to talking about salary, the individual said, well, I really don't know. This is not something I'm good at, and I don't know what to ask for. So it was authentic, but it was ill-prepared, and I think that the outcome was that individual was hired, but did not receive a salary that they probably were competitive for. On the other hand, a couple of other examples. Someone already in a position wanted a higher salary and entered the negotiation not only prepared and knowledgeable about what comparable salaries were internal to the organization and external to the organization, but also had already been engaged in conversations with two outside institutions about alternative positions. So they had prepared themselves and were in more of a position of strength, both with their knowledge and their alternatives before they came to the negotiation table. And a third one is someone, and this is pretty typical, who had prepared but also had an offer in hand, and so that is an even more powerful position to negotiate. There are risks and benefits in having an offer in hand, but it does make the conversation faster as well. And then another example is someone who was interested in an alternate reporting structure in the organization rather than a salary. And what that person had done to strengthen their position was to tap on internal relationships and advocates within the university, so that in negotiating with the individual that they had to negotiate with, they had already had conversations with two other very influential people who affected the outcome. So that was, again, about preparation and how you can not just have facts, but influence and advocacy and relationships as part of your preparation.
Okay, thank you so much. So it sounds like preparation is a key to at least starting on the path of a successful negotiation, coming up with a transparent desired outcome, making sure both sides of the stakeholders have clear priorities, and also tapping into the value of internal relationships and networks seems to be one of the great strategies. So thank you. Okay, move on to our next question. And this question is also for Dr. Cleary and Dr. El-Sayed. Can you think of a time where preparing for the negotiation was essential in achieving success as you negotiated? I know we kind of mentioned this earlier, but can you give us an example of where it was absolute key before you sat down on the table?
I can give a couple of examples. One is, so I've been involved with education throughout my career, and if anybody who's listening has been involved with academics and education, they probably have an appreciation for the politics involved with that sort of, with the change process in curriculum, for example. So some years ago, our institution was preparing to have a vote for a potential curriculum change, which was actually quite modest, not very extreme, but at the time, the structure in our institution was that all faculty needed to vote to approve a curriculum change. And so in that, I think, there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of politics in these decisions. Even though they sometimes aren't big decisions, people care a lot about what they teach and how they teach. And there's strong and passionate feelings sometimes on both sides. So in this particular situation with the proposed curriculum change, a handful of folks organized a communications plan so that in addition to having the communications at the curriculum committee level, there were 2.5 dozen meetings at department meetings, structured department meetings, and with influential groups to present the potential, the proposed change and to answer questions and receive suggestions and think about what tweaks could be made. So that investment of prior to decision making, prior to a vote, that investment of preparing and communicating was vitally important to its success. And briefly, another example where there was another proposal, this had to do with curriculum length change. There was a fair amount of communication about it and preparation, but there was a group, the department chairs were not in favor of this change, and so there was insufficient preparation and dialogue with department chairs to make that change, and so that ultimately resulted in an unsuccessful outcome. So I think preparation is key, and part of it is who are the folks that are important to prepare and talk with ahead of time. So those are two examples.
Okay, great, thank you. Dr. El-Sayed, can you share some of your insights?
Sure, I'm going to give an example. I was offered a position at a competing prestigious institution with an increase in salary and benefits. I was happy in my current role, however, the difference was too great to ignore. And when I spoke to the powers that be about this, I expressed my desire to continue with the company, but also that the current offer that was in my hand was impossible to ignore. I didn't make any demands or give ultimatums. I just asked them to help me to continue to be a part of the team. They understood my desire, appreciated my loyalty, and helped retain me with a competitive counteroffer. So being prepared was essential. Preparing for everything in general is essential. Do your due diligence and use the information the best way that you can possible.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, and Dr. Cleary, I think you could help us answer this a little bit, is sometimes when we are looking to prepare, it's difficult to collect background information, or maybe unexpectedly difficult to obtain that. Can you think of a time, or can you guide us on how do we breach that barrier?
So I'll use salary negotiations as another example of this one. Sometimes you can find benchmark information about salaries. There are publications by professional organizations, by institutions, private, not-for-profit, that can be useful in finding benchmark salaries. But sometimes those are difficult to find. So, and there may be subtleties in how salaries are benchmarked in parts of the country, within your local market, and within the scope of responsibility of what sounds like a title that might have the same title, but in different institutions it carries different responsibilities. So you can find benchmark salary with publications, but when you can't find that, and then you have to start digging deeper. And I found that calling colleagues at other institutions is the most useful way of collecting that information. And usually it's not 1 or 2 calls is insufficient, but 3 or 4 gets you enough information that you can put together something as a surrogate to published information about benchmark salaries. So if you're a director of something or an assistant dean or some other title, you just don't know what that means in other institutions until you start gathering some detailed information. So it's worth the extra time and effort to make phone calls. And even if you don't have personal contacts, you can look up on websites, people who might be in a position to advise you, either HR departments or folks who might be supervisors of the kind of position that you're looking for benchmark salaries.
Okay, that's very helpful. So I think, once again, sometimes leaning upon the network or leaning upon other resources that you may not think of seems to be helpful in gathering some background information. So thank you. Next question is for Dr. Al-Sayed. So there are times when goals can be unclear, and I think it was mentioned earlier that, understanding what the desired outcome is on both sides of the table is important. Can you discuss a time when you were unsure of either your or the other party's exact desired outcome or goals? And if you could tell us what steps you took in gaining clarity to come up with a successful path?
Certainly. So when a goal is new to you, or the institution itself is unclear on the goals, the water looks murky. Certain metrics need to be met, especially when they are in the physician's control, such as the ones related to patient care. But what about when they are not? So, for example, there was one instance when there was an incentive based on if the on-site lab received OSHA status. Now, this was completely new to me. How could I control the outcome? How on earth was I involved in this? So I had to ask the question, was this a dangling carrot or was it a slam dunk? Was it something that was going to happen automatically and that part of the bonus would come as just part of a given, or was there other things involved? So sometimes when the goal is unclear, further clarification is certainly needed.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is a little bit of a pivot. And, sometimes when you are sitting down at a negotiating table, you want to showcase your effort and value. But how do you do this without seeming arrogant? So I think this question first goes to Dr. Adler and then Dr. Cleary.
So, I think you just have to be honest, and you should know your value. You should know what your strengths are. You should know what your strengths are and be evidence. And so I think there's a difference between being arrogant and really just bringing to the table what your strengths and values are. So again, we talked a lot about preparation, but I think being prepared as you go into a negotiation is really critical. And, thinking about as you go into the negotiation, what do I bring to the table? What is the value that I bring, and how can I enhance whatever it is that you're asking for, whether it's a new position or if you're asking to be on a committee, so if it's something small, like I would like to be on this committee and here are the strengths that I bring to it, or if you're asking for a raise, here is the effort that I've put in and the evidence that I have, here is the evidence of the work I've done that shows you that I deserve this raise. And so being prepared, writing it out, showing your work, bringing data, and I think there is a difference of being arrogant and bragging and versus saying, here is the work, here is the data, here is the evidence of my success, which is proof to show you that I bring value and sort of deserve what I am asking for.
Yeah, I want to add to what Dr. Adler said. Actually, she said something earlier that I think relates to this question, and that is about knowing what your colleague in negotiation wants or needs. And I think that I would start from that position first in answering how you showcase your own effort and value, because if you know what they really want and need, you can tailor what you can bring to them in your approach to the conversation. So is it certain skills? Is it certain, is it computer skills? Is it patient care skills? Is it procedural skills? Is it communication skills, presentation skills? So what is it that they really need? And maybe they need generically something for all the folks they employ in this category, but what are they missing? What are they weak in? What do they need? Do they need people to fulfill a different shift if you're hiring hospitalists? Do they need people who are skilled in quality improvement that could complement the set of experiences of the whole group? So what do they need? I would start with that. And then how do your, just to reinforce what Dr. Adler said, how do your own skills, both your hard skills and your soft skills, complement and fit what their needs are? And then highlighting those things to demonstrate how they fit the needs that the individual has or wants. I think there's a fine balance in this. I wouldn't shy off from being confident, and I think that's really important. I think in a couple of questions hence we'll be talking about women, but I think in general women tend to short sell themselves when showcasing your skills or your value in the negotiation process.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like, acknowledging both what the other party values and what you bring to the table, maybe a nice balance of showcasing your skills and your talents and your willingness to work with the other party. Okay. So question 6 is for Dr. Adler and Dr. El-Sayed. Can you share a time when, perhaps creating like the list of reasons why it should be me boosted your confidence? And are there other strategies that you utilize to gain clarity on your own value to your team or your other staff members or workplace?
Sure. So I think, again, it's helpful here to there's two parts to this. The first one is to say, what does the team or the workplace need? And then knowing your strengths and understanding sort of where do the two fit in. And so sometimes it's helpful to say, here's what I bring to the table. And again, keep sort of repeating themes, but it's helpful to be prepared. It's helpful to understand this is what I bring to this small team, this larger unit, this committee. This is what my boss needs on this team and where I am good at those things. And so when you go in and you say, this is the project that we're working on, and what this project needs is somebody who maybe is organized or who's really good with numbers or whatever the case may be. And that's what's missing from the team or what would really enhance the team, or it's a project that's focused on reducing CLABSIs, whatever the case may be, and you have expertise in that area, sort of listing those things out is really helpful when you come to the table and you say, this is why it should be me. And so whether it's that you did a project on that at your old organization and it was really successful, you can bring that to the table. And it really helps you in your talking points when you come and you say, here's why you should pick me. So whether it's that, here's why I deserve the bonus that I'm asking for because X, Y, and Z was met and I was successful and here's how I helped the organization, or whether it's here's why I deserve this job because in the past year I've done these 4 projects on my own with the resources I've had and now I'd like more time. I think sort of writing things out really brings clarity. It also, as Dr. Cleary was saying, helps sort of crystallize in your head what you're actually asking for. So I think it helps give you confidence. It helps think about what it is that you really want, and then it helps sort of close that gap analysis of what the organization needs or what the person you're working with needs and what you bring to the table.
Yes, to echo Dr. Adler's sentiment, I agree. If you're truly interested in a position and feel this is the right fit, you have to transmit that feeling. You have to show that you really want the position. So in fact, after stating your case and trying to prove your point, the end result should be to let them feel that if you are not picked for this position, they would be making a terrible mistake. So it's a matter of the confidence in it and making them feel that they are doing the absolute best thing possible for their situation by picking you. So being prepared and putting together a list of reasons beforehand will not only boost your confidence, but it will show that you are well suited for the task.
Okay, thank you. So, I think our next question is really going to be based off of, there's been a few studies, like Dr. Clear had mentioned, about the way women versus men approach negotiations. And one of the studies was published in the Harvard Business Review by Tara Sophia Moore. And what the question it looked for was that it asked men versus women to give reasons why they did not apply for a job. And one of the most striking things to me was the fact that it seemed that men would apply for a job when they met about 60% of the qualifications, and women were more likely to apply if they met 100%. So one of the takeaways from the study was that a lot of times women feel they may not be the perfect fit for a role or may not have all the qualifications, but keeping that as a barrier from applying for a job or a different title and so on and so forth. So our question number 7, which is for both Dr. Adler and Dr. Cleary, would be, how would you guide women in building their confidence at various professional levels? So it could be somebody who's a resident, a student, a fellow, a junior faculty, or even a senior faculty for that matter. And can you share a scenario where you really seized the opportunity to advocate for yourself for a position that you felt may be slightly above your reach?
Sure. So again, we've spoken a little bit about this in terms of really thinking about, what do you bring to the table, even writing it out, what expertise do you have, what experience do you have? I think writing things down a lot of the time, or talking to somebody, utilizing your mentors, all of those are useful skills, especially when you're questioning yourself. I think a personal scenario for me, I was sort of off, an opportunity came up, and I sort of had one of these imposter complexes, if you will. I wasn't sure if the opportunity seemed bigger than me. I wasn't sure if I was the right fit for me. And I think sometimes in these instances, you just have to sort of do a lot of the things that we talked about, which is think about what skills you have, think about your past experiences. Like I said, utilize your mentors, and then sometimes you just have to take the leap. And I also can't sort of stress enough, it's not exactly built into this question, but something that's really critical is, I was just talking about this with a colleague of mine, which is sort of, if you don't ask, you don't get. And so you really need to ask for what you need, because people, and again, I think this is like, there've been studies about this too, I think men do this more than women do. And if you, people are not mind readers. And so if there are things that you want or need, you need to be explicit about them. So again, like in a job like this, if there's something that's a far reach and you're going to try it and go for it, but there's something you need to make it work for you, I think you need to ask for that too. Otherwise, nobody is going to know that that's something you need to be successful if you don't ask for it. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dr. Adler said. And I think this thing about confidence is not gender specific, although it does tend to be an issue more for women. So I think it's for everyone. But first of all, I want to just highlight one of the references that Dr. Sagar provides in the last slide. And it's an article from the Harvard Business Review in 2014, and that's where she got the graphic on the last slide. But that's a very useful analysis of how women discount themselves even before they ask or before they apply for something, more likely than men. Now, some men do the same thing, but there's a statistically different statistical difference, in how women approach this versus men. So don't prematurely discount yourself. Don't be too literal in following a position description requirements. Sometimes it's more than what's written that is needed. I think another one is not to be afraid of failure or risk. So there's a lot of risk aversion in the process of either applying for a position or negotiating for a higher salary or a different set of job expectations or responsibilities or appointment to X, Y, or Z. So there's risk, various amounts of risk involved in those things. And I think thinking through what your risks are and then boosting your confidence by, as Dr. Adler said, talking with mentors, talking with friends, thinking about what makes you confident. What is it that adds to your confidence? What's different about a day where you're feeling confident versus a day when you're feeling not confident? And then consciously do the things that make you confident, whether it's, having a good breakfast or what you wear that day or, what you're thinking about on your way to the negotiation. So something about putting your mind in the mindset of feeling confident. And I think this thing about not being afraid to fail, what's the worst that can happen if you don't get what you want? You will have tried something. It's like any skill. You're practicing something that you're going to get better at the more you do it. If you wind up repeatedly failing, then you have to start to say, well, examine what's going wrong. Am I totally unrealistic? Have I not looked at what your partner in negotiation has as their parameters or their limits? Am I just not thinking the right way? Am I, overreaching? What is it? What's happening when you have repeated failures? But what's the worst that can happen when you ask for something? Somebody could say no. I mean, that's not so bad. And even if they partly say yes, you get partly there, that's achieving something. So I think be willing to take risks, be willing to ask, do your homework, build your confidence in whatever way that works for you, talk to colleagues and friends, practice, maybe role play a conversation. Think about how it can play out, what are the various scenarios that can happen, and role play those different scenarios, and then challenge yourself to deal with those in the moment by practicing.
Those are all great strategies. I really love the idea of, wearing what I feel makes me feel confident, ready to tackle my day, and writing things down, practicing, role play, speak to your mentors. That sounds great. Thank you for sharing. And I think this is going to bring us to one of our last questions for Dr. El-Sayed, this question. And it's, there are always factors that you have control over and things that you may not have control over that influence a negotiation. How do you discover these factors while you're in the middle of the negotiation or maybe when you're wrapping it up?
So discovery of which factors are in your control will arise after asking some of the appropriate questions. A big part of it is to let the other party speak. Many master negotiators and leaders have stated this over and over. Don't say anything unless being asked and just listen. Many famous CEOs or directors of hospitals, for the first 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting, force themselves to not say a word and let everyone talk. And from there, you can kind of get a feel and you can orient yourself in what people are looking for. So some people like to talk a lot, and by doing so, you won't let the other person talk and share valuable information. And it can also reflect poorly on oneself. So you have to have a little control over yourself, what you say, and how you respond with body language and other motion. Using these tools, the other party will be at ease and can share the uncontrollable factors and even let you gain some control over them.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like, listening in is one of the key things and allowing the other party to talk. I think, Karen, we can open this up for the Q&A with the audience.
And Katie, this is Lynn. May I say one other thing about question 7?
Absolutely.
I wanted to say something about salary negotiation for women. I think this whole conversation, we would be amiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the gap between salaries for women and men in medicine as well as so many other professions and how to manage this. So I think it's really important for women at the very beginning of their career to negotiate their salary as strongly as they possibly can, because the early career salary sets the stage for growth in salary over the course of a career. And it's just like any investment. The earlier and the sooner and the more you do this, the better off you are at the end. So I think building your confidence in negotiating for salary at the beginning of your career and every stretch along the way is particularly important, and I want to just encourage any women who are listening to really think about this. Don't shy away from the topic because it's uncomfortable. Prepare yourself to engage in it because it's an investment in your future.
I just wanted to say, I agree 100%. As the father of daughters, it is absolutely an excellent point, and I think a lot of it is also finding a good mentor, male or female. You know, I have a lot of the female residents, and if there's nobody to help guide them, family-wise, etc., they need to find a good faculty mentor to help them through the business part of the model. Thank you, Dr. Cleary.
I think those are excellent points. I actually want to give each of the panelists a moment if you guys wanted to add on any of the other questions also. So if you guys have any other thoughts that you would like to share before we open up for the Q&A with the audience, go ahead.
Right now, Ankita, there are no questions in the queue, so if any of our attendees would like to submit a question, we're open at this time with a dialog box on the right-hand side.
While we're waiting for questions, this is Lynn Cleary again. I guess I want to encourage people to think about positive ways of negotiating in any number of conversations that you have, particularly in the workplace, and to read what you can about effective negotiations. I mean, a lot of it's built on effective communication, but there are particular skills in negotiating that will help in all kinds of things. When you're talking about coverage at work, contracts with a hospital, the number of people the number of folks in your group that are going to be employed by the hospital or the medical school or the organization, whether or not you're going to be able to have the hospital or your group practice pay for scribes for the electronic record. All of these small things relate to negotiation skills. And I think some of the fundamental techniques we've talked about can be used more often and might lead to joint problem solving more often. And I think that reading references, and there's some classic books, Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, Hardball for Women, and some of the Harvard Business Review articles in the slide at the end. I think all of them, it's useful investing a little time in educating yourself about negotiation.
Dr. Segar, we got a couple questions too, if you wouldn't mind me sharing.
Sure, go for it, Karen.
Okay, great. Dr. El-Sayed said he had an offer from another institution when he went to his own institution to ask for a higher salary. Must one have a nuclear option, such as leaving an institution to get leverage in a negotiation with a current employer?
What was the word, nuclear?
Nuclear option, such as, yeah, he said, must one have a nuclear option, such as leaving an institution to get leverage in a negotiation with a current employer? Another option.
That's a great question. Yeah, I was not, I was actively looking at the time because there was a little bit of transition, and the institution itself was not sure how they were going to transition some of us from one department to another. So they understood that we were looking around and stuff. It's an interesting point when you start going out to hunt and trying to find a different job, some people are okay with it and they need that evidence. So they can go back to the finance department and say, listen, it looks like we're underpaying the staff and it would cost us more to find someone else, and they're being a positive influence and they're generating income for the institution. So as far as, are you going to say either you're going to do this or else, that's a question that you're going to have to answer. If you're going to have to say, I'm very happy where I'm at, it would be nice if I was making a little bit more, or to leave, is a question only the individual can answer.
And this is Lynn Cleary. I think that to add to that, in the negotiation process, the balance of strength or balance of power is important. And so, I don't want to overstress the adversarial part of negotiation, because there's a joint problem-solving part of it that's really important. But the more you can put yourself in a position of strength, the better off, the more likely you're going to have a positive outcome in your favor for the negotiation. And while you don't want to have to go to the nuclear option, it all depends on what your situation is as to how much you have to strengthen yourself. Sometimes just facts are useful to give yourself more strength. Sometimes you have to go further with alternatives. And I think the phrase best alternative to a negotiated agreement is worth mentioning here, a BATNA, because if you have to have one, I think, when you're entering any negotiation. You have to know, what is it that you're willing to do? What do you want to do? What will you be satisfied with? Maybe not ideal, but what will you be able to be satisfied with and agree to? And then what will make you walk away? And that is your alternative. And if walking away means you can walk away without any change in your salary, for example, then okay, and you'll stay in the same position. But if you really need to have that salary, then you have to have your alternatives ready. And whether it's another position, another job, or something else, you have to think about that.
And I totally agree. It's Dr. Adler. The other thing I'd add that we didn't quite touch upon is the timing of your negotiation. So in addition to, you have another job offer, and so you're bringing a negotiation to the table, I think it's always important to just think about timing your negotiation appropriately. So if you're going to ask for a raise, but there's a hiring freeze, for example, that's not the time to go and say, I would like more money. So I think it's always just important to time your negotiation, whatever it is that you're asking for, in the institutional climate, the climate of your boss. If someone new just got hired, letting them get acclimated a little bit before you go and ask for something. So it's just always important to be mindful, whatever it is that you're going to negotiate about, within the larger picture. So I think that's worth mentioning as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adler. I did have another question in the queue. Could one of the panelists comment about the role of contracts and what to do if aspects of the contract are not honored?
It depends if it's written down. If it's a legally binding agreement, that is, and that's why you have to be very careful when you are going back and forth and emails are being sent and everything. And this is why sometimes you have to ask them to append the contract. Whether you discuss something, okay, whether it's salary, this, and you signed an original contract that does not reflect that, then that could be in the institution's favor. So there must be revisions made to the contract, and all the parties sign to it and agree to it. And depending on the severity is depending on how far you want to go to enforce it.
And picking up on that, I think it gets to fundamental negotiation principles. If there's something not being honored in a contract, first of all, ask yourself, what do you want? Is it exactly that thing that's not being honored, or is there something else? Has that triggered a whole series of other problems with trust or delivery or whatever it is that you want? So define what it is you want from the conversation, and then define at the outset what it is that you're going to be satisfied with, and figure out what your alternative is. And those are the boundaries of your conversation. what you want, what you're willing to settle for, and then what you're willing to do if you don't get what you want. And that's how you can approach either a clause in a contract or any other sort of negotiation.
At this time, that was the last question in the queue. Dr. Segar, were there any last comments before we end today?
You know, I really want to thank each of the panelists because I was taking notes as we were going through, and I think that there are certain themes that tend to repeat. Some of them are preparation. That includes knowing what you want as a party, knowing what the other party wants, and also having the knowledge on what you're willing to be flexible upon. The other theme that I really think came out was knowing what your value is and being confident and showing that to the other party in order to be successful. And another one that I think really spoke to me was the fact that leaning upon your professional relationships, whether that's mentors, your professional society, HR, or even network within your workplace or med school network, that can really help guide you as you're trying to understand where you are in this process. So I think those are some key themes that tend to really are very important. I think it's been very insightful for me. So yeah, I want to leave it open to the panelists if they wanted to say anything, last thoughts, things that you would like to share.
I'll just say good luck.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. We'll be needing that.
Dr. El-Sayed, any last words?
Good luck. Don't be afraid to ask for things and talk with people. Find somebody you feel comfortable with and say, hey, let me bounce this idea off of you. This is what I'm planning on doing.
Dr. Adler?
Thank you for having me. I agree. I think definitely, again, prepare. Don't forget that people do not intuitively know what you are asking for or looking for. Don't be afraid to ask for things, and just, the timing is critical, but with preparation and being upfront, I think you can be very successful.
Okay.
Thank
you so much.
Right, and well, I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the chapter to thank all the panelists and Ankita. This is very insightful. We will have the recorded version on our chapter website later on today or Monday, and I will be sending all participants the handouts. This concludes our webinar. I will be closing the session for all. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.